Imagine discovering that the very foundation of our historical timeline, like the exact year a notorious ancient king died, might be completely wrong.
Right.
And all because a tired printer made a single typographical error back in the year 1544.
I mean, it really sounds like the plot of some historical thriller.
It totally does. But it's actually the starting point for a massive debate about how we construct or, tear down the history of the ancient world.
Exactly.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are exploring this really fascinating collision between modern scientific skepticism and ancient historiography.
Yeah, we have an incredibly unique stack of sources in front of us for this one.
Yeah, we really do. On one side, we're looking at a 2011 book titled I Look at Christianity, Reflections of an Intellectual.
Right.
And this is authored by Professor Li Yaming, who is a retired professor of physics and materials science from National Tsinghua University.
Which is an important context because he brings a highly rigorous mathematical kind of skepticism to these ancient texts.
Right, he's looking for hard data. And on the other side, we have this detailed theological and historical critique that responds directly to his claims.
Yeah, and it really acts as a window into the multidisciplinary world of modern scholarship.
It's massive. And just to give you, the listener, a sense of how broad the response to these kinds of skeptical claims actually is, we're also looking at a source image listing the multilingual scholars connected to this precise academic context.
Yeah, the linguistic depth here is amazing. We're looking at names operating across totally different traditions.
Right.
Scholars like Frank Leo or Liu Zongtang in the Chinese context.
Yeah.
Moshe Halevi working with Hebrew, and Franciscus Mouse's Louis takes in Greek.
Actually, there is only one author. All the names mentioned are the author's names in different languages.
I mean, it really highlights the immense cross-cultural depth required to actually debate these ancient texts properly.
Absolutely.
Now, before we get into the mechanisms of this debate, we need to be incredibly clear with you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
We are acting strictly as neutral guides today.
Right, we're not taking sides in any underlying theological debate here.
Exactly. Nor are we here to tell you who is spiritually right or wrong. That's not what this is about.
No, our goal is just to impartially report on Professor Li's claims and then walk you through the robust academic counterarguments presented in the source texts.
Basically, we want to see how historians actually do their jobs when faced with this kind of skepticism.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at three major historical puzzles today. The exact date of King Herod's death, a supposedly missing Roman census, and a deeply tangled family tree.
Right, so let's begin with that foundational metric,
Yeah.
dates.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So Professor Li makes a very straightforward binary claim. He points out that King Herod died in 4 BC.
Right, which is the date you'll find in most textbooks.
Exactly. And because the ancient narratives claim Jesus was born during Herod's reign, the timelines simply do not overlap in a way that makes sense.
Because mathematically, the years just don't line up.
Right, so applying the strict logic of a physicist, Professor Li concludes the narrative is a fable. The math does not work, so the text must be discarded.
But the critique we have challenges the very foundation of that math.
Yes, it does.
Because that established 4 BC date for Herod's death, it isn't a hard scientific law.
Not at all.
It's actually a highly contested theory among serious modern scholars.
Yeah, the whole 4 BC consensus really stems from a single calculation made way back in 1898.
1898.
Yeah, by a historian named Emil Schurer. He was interpreting the writings of the ancient historian Josephus, and he linked Herod's death to a specific lunar eclipse.
Right, an eclipse that occurred on March 13th, 4 BC.
But the problem is the astronomical reality of that specific eclipse.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
It was a partial eclipse, and it happened well after midnight.
Wait, so it wasn't even like a massive sky-darkening event?
No. I mean, think about the ancient world. Without telescopes, without mass communication.
Most of the agrarian population is fast asleep at that hour.
Exactly. A post-midnight partial eclipse is barely a footnote. It is highly unlikely to be the kind of dramatic celestial event that an ancient historian would use to anchor the death of a monumental king.
It sounds like anchoring a whole historical timeline to a totally weak piece of evidence. I mean, it's like trying to date a modern event based on a cloudy night where no one even saw the moon.
That's a great way to put it.
Which begs the question, if the 1898 calculation was anchored to such a weak astronomical event, how did it become the unquestioned standard in the textbooks?
Well, this brings us to the fragility of historical transmission.
Yeah.
And the work of a researcher named David W. Beyer in 1995.
Right.
Beyer didn't just accept the textbook date. He went back to the raw data.
He actually engaged in manuscript comparison.
Yeah, tracing the textual lineage of Josephus's writings.
Yeah.
He examined the pre-1544 manuscripts housed in places like the British Museum and the Library of Congress.
And what he found is kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. He discovered that every single older manuscript pointed to Herod dying much early in 1 BC.
Wait, really? So where did 4 BC come from?
The 4 BC date hinges heavily on a massive printing error, a literal typo introduced in the 1544 edition of Josephus's texts.
So the invention of the printing press actually accelerated an error.
Exactly. Once that 1544 edition was mass-produced, subsequent scholars and translators just replicated the bug over and over until it became a fact.
Wow. And when you correct the timeline to 1 BC, the supporting evidence suddenly locks into place, right?
Yes, because a physics professor named John A. Kramer pointed out that on December 29th, 1 BC, there actually was a dramatic, highly visible lunar eclipse in Judea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the moon rose already half eclipsed in the early evening.
Now, that is a highly visible, memorable event that the public would actually talk about and associate with a dying king.
Exactly. And the sources also bring in physical evidence to support this.
Right, specifically numismatic data, the physical coins from the era.
Yeah, Andrew Steinman's analysis of coins minted by Herod's son, Philip.
And what do those show?
They show that Philip started numbering his reign with year 5, corresponding to 1 AD.
Which is a crucial detail because in ancient bureaucracies, co-regency was incredibly common.
Right. Philip was granted administrative power from his father in 4 BC, so he started counting his regnal years from that moment.
But he didn't assume full independent rule until his father actually died.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So counting back from the coin data, a 1 BC death for Herod aligns perfectly with the administrative records.
For you listening, this is just a brilliant lesson in epistemology, like how we know what we think we know.
Absolutely.
If you blindly trust the established textbook date without looking at the manuscript stemma, the visible astronomy, and the physical coinage, you miss the entire picture.
You do. And if Herod died in 1 BC and Jesus was born around 3 or 2 BC, as scholars like Jack Finnegan argue, the timeline contradiction completely evaporates.
Which is just wild, but that leads us to an entirely different scale of historical problem. Because if a single typo can corrupt the timeline of a king, how do we evaluate massive administrative events happening in that same contested era?
This brings us to Professor Lai's second major claim, the phantom census of Augustus.
Right, the census.
He argues that Roman records show Emperor Augustus never conducted a census between 27 BC and 14 AD.
Which would render the famous story of a mass registration completely unhistorical.
Exactly. But the critique dismantles this by going straight to the primary sources.
Right.
We have Emperor Augustus's own autobiography, the Res Gestae.
Which was literally carved in bronze and stone across the empire, right?
And in Section 8, Augustus explicitly details conducting 3 massive censuses of Roman citizens. He dates them to 28 BC, 8 BC, and 14 AD.
Wow. So the foundational claim that Augustus never did a census during that window is factually incorrect based on the emperor's own monumental bragging.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to step in here and push back a bit on behalf of our listeners.
Sure.
Because finding a census in Rome doesn't fully solve the problem, does it? Professor Lai's skepticism has layers.
True.
He might concede that Augustus counted Roman citizens in the capital, but Rome wouldn't force a localized census in a client kingdom like Judea, which had its own local ruler.
Right, that's a common argument.
And beyond that, the bureaucratic logistics of forcing subjects to travel to their ancestral hometowns just to sign a tax form sounds utterly absurd.
It does sound crazy to us.
Right. It feels like a contrived plot device inserted by an author just to get a character born in Bethlehem.
And it is a highly logical pushback. To a modern mind used to filling out tax forms online from our living rooms, the idea of traveling to an ancestral home seems ridiculously inefficient.
Seriously.
But this is where paperology steps in and shows us how the Roman bureaucratic machinery actually functioned in the provinces.
Okay.
The critique references a specific document from the British Museum, Papyrus London 904. It dates to around 104 AD.
And what's on it?
It contains an official decree from a Roman prefect in Egypt. This papyrus proves that the region had regular 14-year census cycles.
Wow.
And more importantly, the decree explicitly orders And the Greek translation is vital here, that all those who for any cause whatsoever are residing outside their provinces to return to their own homes.
So they needed people to return to their original agricultural and tax districts.
Yes.
So the empire could accurately assess land yields and labor forces. I mean, it wasn't about modern efficiency. It was about ancient control.
Exactly. And regarding the idea that Rome wouldn't intervene in a client kingdom,
Right.
the Roman historian Tacitus explicitly records that in 36 AD, Emperor Tiberius ordered a census in the client kingdom of Cappadocia.
Oh, wow.
We also have an inscription from a Roman officer named Aemilius Secundus detailing a census in Apamea, an independent city-state. Rome regularly embedded its tax structures into the internal affairs of client states.
Okay, but wait. There is still a massive sticking point in the text itself.
The timeline with Quirinius.
Yes. The Gospel of Luke specifically names Quirinius as governor of Syria during this census. And we know from multiple other historical records that Quirinius did not hold that specific governorship until 6 AD.
Right.
The timeline is off by an entire decade. How does a 14-year provincial tax cycle fix the problem of an author dropping a name into the wrong decade?
That is the most persistent puzzle regarding the census. And to solve it, the critique forces us to look at ancient linguistic ambiguity.
Language translation.
Yeah. The Greek grammar in Luke 2.2 is notoriously tricky. The Greek word prote is traditionally translated as first.
Making the sentence read, this was the first census when Quirinius was governor?
Right. But prote can also be translated as the comparative before.
Oh, really?
Yes. It is similar to how the English word oversight can mean both the act of supervising something and the act of accidentally missing something entirely. Context changes the definition.
Oh, I see. So relying on the comparative translation, the sentence would actually read, this census took place before Quirinius was governor of Syria. That completely reorients the timeline.
It does. And many respected commentators like John Noland and David Garland actually support this grammatical reading.
Wow.
Furthermore, the critique brings in Professor Sabine Hubner from the University of Basel. She suggests we also have to look at the Greek word used for governor, which is hegemoniontos.
Okay, and what does that mean?
It was a highly flexible administrative term. Quirinius might have simply been operating as a lower-level financial procurator or military administrator in the region during an earlier census.
Years before he earned the top job as governor.
Right. Which totally aligns with the broader historical track record of the author, Luke.
Yeah, because classical scholars who specialize in verifying Roman history generally praise Luke's rigorous accuracy.
They do. The historian Colin Heimer identified 84 distinct, independently confirmed historical details in the second half of Luke's other text, the Acts of the Apostles.
A for detail.
Yeah. He got the names of local officials, shipping routes, obscure harbor towns exactly right.
That's impressive. The Roman historian A.N. Sherwin-White even argued that attempting to reject Luke's basic historicity is absurd.
And interestingly, Luke even explicitly mentions the later, highly contentious 6 AD census of Quirinius in Acts 5.37.
So he knew there were multiple censuses.
Exactly. He wasn't just confused.
Well, this provides a pretty natural transition to the third puzzle.
The genealogies.
Right. If the Roman Empire was forcing its subjects to maintain these complex ancestral registrations for tax and labor purposes, how were families actually tracking those bloodlines?
Yeah.
Which leads directly to Professor Lee's third claim, the seemingly contradictory genealogies.
Because to a skeptical reader, the family trees are a glaring error.
Oh, totally. The Gospel of Matthew traces the lineage from King David through his son Solomon, descending down to a man named Jacob, who is listed as Joseph's father.
Right.
But the Gospel of Luke traces the line from David through an entirely different son, Nathan, descending to a man named Heli, who is listed as Joseph's father. So, biologically speaking, who is Joseph's father, Jacob or Heli? Professor Lee looks at this and declares it an obvious fabrication.
But what's fascinating here is the critique introduces the classical harmonizations that approach these texts not as mistakes, but as distinct legal and biological records.
Right.
And these are not modern excuses. They are frameworks debated since the early centuries of the church. The first is the Mary versus Joseph explanation.
Okay, break that down.
Scholars like John Lightfoot, building on the work of Epiphanius in the 4th century, argued that Luke's genealogy isn't Joseph's family tree at all.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The Greek text in Luke 3.23 contains a vital grammatical parenthesis. It states, Jesus was the son, as was supposed, of Joseph of Hyle.
Ah, so the phrase "as was supposed" indicates that while the public assumed Jesus was Joseph's son, the genealogy is actually bypassing Joseph entirely.
Exactly, connecting Jesus to his grandfather Hyle, who was Mary's father.
Okay, so Matthew is giving us the public legal line of royal succession through the adopted father Joseph, likely pulled from public temple records. Meanwhile, Luke, who is noted for interviewing eyewitnesses, is providing the actual biological line through the mother, Mary.
That is one robust explanation. But the critique also details a second framework championed by John of Damascus in the 8th century, the Levirate marriage explanation.
Okay, what is that?
To understand this, you have to understand ancient agrarian property laws, specifically Levirate law found in Deuteronomy 25.
Right.
If a man died without producing an heir, his brother was legally obligated to marry the widow.
Oh, wow.
The first son born to that new union would not carry the biological father's name. He would legally carry on the name, the property, and the inheritance of the deceased brother.
Okay, but how does that specific property law apply to the puzzle of Jacob and Hyle?
John of Damascus explained that Jacob and Hyle were half-brothers. They shared the same mother but had different fathers.
Oh, I see.
Jacob was descended from Solomon's royal line. Hyle was descended from Nathan's line. Hyle married but died without producing a child.
So following the strict requirements of Levirate law, his half-brother Jacob married the widow.
Exactly. They produced a son, Joseph.
Which creates a fascinating dual reality.
It does.
Because biologically, Joseph is the son of Jacob, which is exactly why Matthew's text says Jacob begot Joseph.
Right.
But legally, under the law of the land, Joseph is the son and heir of the deceased Hyle, which is why Luke traces the legal ancestry through Hyle.
It is two different bureaucratic contexts capturing the exact same family unit.
That's wild.
It perfectly illustrates how an ancient reader would understand the nuances of inheritance, whereas a modern reader just sees conflicting data.
So what does this all mean? Because this connects deeply to a highly specific theological mechanism mentioned in the sources, right? The Jeconiah curse.
Yes, this is perhaps the most intricate detail in the entire critique.
In the ancient texts, specifically Jeremiah 22.30, a corrupt king named Jeconiah is cursed.
Right.
The text explicitly states that no biological descendant of Jeconiah will ever prosper or sit on the throne of David again.
Which presents a catastrophic problem if you are claiming your central figure is the legitimate king of Israel descended from David.
Because if he is in the royal bloodline, he inherits the curse.
Exactly.
It's like a brilliant legal loophole for a royal succession.
Yeah.
But tracing the legal royal succession through Joseph, who is descended from the cursed line of Jeconiah, the title of king is transferred through adoption.
Right.
But because the biology comes exclusively from Mary, who is descended from David's other son Nathan, the biology completely bypasses the cursed line.
He receives the legal right to the throne without inheriting the biological curse.
That is just incredible. To dismiss these genealogies as simple errors is to entirely miss the highly sophisticated legal and theological maneuver taking place.
It really is. And having analyzed the dates, the tax papyri, and the inheritance laws, we kind of had to zoom out and look at the philosophy of history itself.
Yeah, we do.
Like, why do these texts look messy at first glance, and how should a modern thinker evaluate them? The critique introduces the principle of independent attestation, cited by scholar Craig Blomberg.
Okay.
If 4 ancient documents matched perfectly in every single detail, historians would immediately throw them out. They'd suspect collusion, copying, or coercion.
Just like in a modern courtroom, if 4 witnesses take the stand and recount a chaotic event using the exact same phrasing, the jury assumes they rehearsed their testimony in the hallway.
Exactly. Even the 2nd century Roman jurist Titus acknowledged this dynamic in his legal digests. Differences in peripheral details are the hallmark of independent eyewitnesses.
That makes perfect sense.
Richard Bauckham refers to this as the perspective principle. Witnesses notice different things based on their background, their proximity to the event, and the specific audience they are addressing.
And the critique also directly tackles Professor Lai's heavy reliance on the argument from silence, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. Professor Lai frequently asserts that if a massive secular Roman source doesn't document an event, it simply did not happen.
Which the archaeologist Kenneth Kitchen famously warned against, coining the vital rule. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Right. It's a fundamental rule of archaeology.
And the critique applies this historiographical rule to the story of King Herod massacring the infants in Bethlehem.
Yeah, that's a prime example.
Because critics frequently point out that no major Roman historian wrote about this specific massacre, rendering it a myth.
Right.
But when you apply demographic math to the ancient world, the picture completely changes. Bethlehem was a tiny rural village, likely holding no more than 1,000 people.
Which is very small.
A targeted massacre of infant boys under the age of 2 might realistically result in maybe 20 deaths.
Right.
Now, the murder of 20 children is an absolute atrocity, but you have to view it through the lens of King Herod's terrifying blood-soaked reign.
Yeah, this was a paranoid ruler who famously murdered his own wife, his mother-in-law, and several of his own sons to protect his power.
Exactly. So, to a Roman historian sitting in the imperial capital, a localized killing of 20 people by a notoriously violent client king simply wouldn't register as newsworthy enough to carve into the official imperial annals.
That is the messy, multi-perspective reality of ancient demographics and reporting.
Right. Does a physicist's demand for perfect, uniform data work when dealing with the messy reality of ancient history?
The critique argues strongly that it doesn't. Demanding uniform binary data, the kind a physicist expects in a laboratory, does not work here.
No.
To fairly evaluate these texts, you cannot rely on a single discipline. You need archaeology to unearth the coins, the virology to understand the provincial tax cycles,
Right.
linguistics to decipher the comparative Greek grammar, and an understanding of ancient inheritance laws to read the family trees.
It's just a massive web of evidence.
It really is.
So, to summarize our journey today, we took an impartial look at the intense friction between a modern scientific skeptic and specialized historical scholarship.
Yes.
And we discovered that what appears to be an obvious fable or an embarrassing contradiction at first glance often unfolds into an incredibly rich historical tapestry.
I mean, we navigated a 1544 typo that altered our calendar.
Yeah.
Roman tax decrees preserved in the Egyptian desert.
Yeah.
And complex adoption laws bypassing ancient royal curses.
It's been quite the ride.
It has. And applying this methodology to you, the listener, navigating the modern world, the real danger of our current age of information overload is the temptation to look at a summary or single perspective and confidently declare an error.
Oh, 100%.
We see a headline or a data point that contradicts our worldview, and we instantly dismiss it.
Right.
But true understanding, whether analyzing a 2,000-year-old manuscript or a modern geopolitical issue, requires immense patience. It requires a willingness to look through multiple lenses, linguistic, historical, cultural, before rushing to a binary conclusion.
It requires the patience to sit in the messy data. Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with, building on that idea of the argument from silence and the fragility of historical records.
Okay.
Think about that papyrus document, -P, Lon 904. It survived for thousands of years, buried in the dry Egyptian sand, waiting to prove to modern skeptics that a 14-year provincial tax cycle actually existed.
Right.
Now, consider how we record our own civilization's history today. We do not carve our achievements in bronze, and we don't write our administrative decrees on durable parchment.
Here we do.
We record our lives, our economies, and our conflicts mostly in the cloud, on vulnerable servers, and in rapidly decaying digital code.
Wow.
If a historian 2,000 years from now applies Professor Lee's strict rule of, if I don't see the source document, it didn't happen, to our era, what massive world-changing events of our generation will they confidently assume were just myths simply because a server farm crashed, a hard drive corrupted, or a digital file format became obsolete?
That is wild to think about.
Are we leaving behind a history even half as durable as papyrus?
That is a chilling and necessary question to ponder.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the consensus, keep exploring the sources, and we'll see you next time.